Listen, I've been teaching at the Galactic Military Academy for 300 cycles now, and let me tell you something. I thought I'd seen everything. Zephyrian cadets who could phase through walls? Check. Mollusk warriors who could regenerate limbs? Double check. Heck, I even had a quantum class being who existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. But humans? Oh, sweet cosmic radiation. Humans were something else entirely. My name is Professor Vex Morthen, and I teach advanced combat theory to the most promising young warriors in the galaxy. Now, when they told me I'd be getting a human in my class, I'll admit it, I laughed. Actually, I laughed so hard that my secondary breathing apparatus started wheezing. Humans, those soft, pink little creatures from that backwards death planet they call Earth? What could they possibly contribute to a class designed for apex predators? Boy, was I in for a surprise. The human's name was Jessica Stone. 5 feet, 6 inches of what appeared to be delicate bone structure wrapped in pale skin. She had these strange brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and hair the color of autumn leaves on Centauri Prime. When she walked into my classroom that first day, half the students barely glanced her way. The other half? Well, they were sizing her up like she was their next meal. "Welcome, Cadet Stone," I said, trying to keep the amusement out of my voice. "Please, take a seat anywhere you'd like." She nodded politely, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you, Professor Morthen." The accent was fascinating, really. These humans had thousands of different speech patterns depending on which part of their planet they originated from. Jessica's had this peculiar musical quality that made even simple words sound intriguing. She found an empty seat near the back, right between Corva, a 7-foot-tall Drachmarian with razor-sharp claws, and Thex, whose species literally breathed fire when excited. Poor thing, I thought. She'll be eaten alive. The first few weeks went better than expected. I'll give her that. Jessica was quiet, attentive, and surprisingly knowledgeable about tactical theory. When I'd pose hypothetical combat scenarios, she'd often come up with solutions that were, well, let's call them creative. While other students would suggest frontal assaults or overwhelming firepower, Jessica would find ways to turn the enemy's strengths against them. "What if we cut the power to their defensive grid?" she suggested during one lesson about siege warfare. Corva snorted, which sounded like a steam engine having mechanical problems. "Impossible, human. The power sources are heavily guarded." "But what if we didn't attack the power sources directly?" Jessica continued, completely unfazed by the dismissive tone. "What if we overloaded their communication systems instead? Force them to reroute power to compensate?" I had to admit, it wasn't a bad idea. Not bad at all. But here's the thing about academy life. It's not just about classroom performance. There's a whole social ecosystem that exists between classes, in the dormitories, in the recreational areas. And in that ecosystem, humans were considered, well, prey. It started small. Corva would accidentally bump into Jessica in the hallways, sending her stumbling. Thex would breathe a little too heavily when she passed, singeing the edges of her uniform. Zara, a crystalline-based life form from the Andromeda sector, would make cutting remarks about primitive species whenever Jessica spoke up in class. The human took it all with remarkable grace, I'll admit. She never complained, never retaliated, never even showed much emotion about it. She'd simply dust off her uniform, fix her hair, and continue on her way. It was almost unsettling, actually. Most species would have either fought back or requested a transfer by now. "She's tougher than she looks," I mentioned to my colleague Professor Zerion during lunch one day. "Tough?" Zerion's mandibles clicked in amusement. She's a human, Vex. They're barely above the insect classification on the sentience scale. She's probably just too stupid to realize she's being bullied. Oh, how wrong we were. The incident happened during my Advanced Combat Scenarios class, 3 months into the semester. I was demonstrating a particularly complex maneuver using holographic projections when I noticed Jessica wasn't paying attention. Instead, she was staring out the massive viewport that showed the Academy's training grounds below. "Cadet Stone," I called out, my voice carrying just enough authority to make half the class flinch. "Perhaps you'd like to share what's so interesting outside that window?" She turned back to me with those unsettling brown eyes. "Sorry, Professor. I was just watching the maintenance crews. They're using a really inefficient pattern to repair the damaged training platforms." Corva let out that steam engine snort again, as if a primitive would know anything about efficiency. That's when something changed in Jessica's expression. It was subtle, so subtle that I almost missed it. But for just a moment, those brown eyes went completely flat. Not angry, not hurt, just empty. It was the look of a predator deciding whether something was worth the effort to kill. Then she smiled, and the moment passed. "You're probably right, Corva," she said pleasantly. "What would I know?" After class, as students were filing out, I noticed Corva lingering behind with 3 of his friends, Thex, Zara, and a hulking Goranian named Brutus. They waited until the classroom was nearly empty before approaching Jessica, who was calmly packing her study materials. I should have intervened right then, should have sent them on their way. But I'll be honest, I was curious. I wanted to see how the human would handle a confrontation. "Hey, primitive!" Corva growled, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant trouble. "We need to talk." Jessica looked up from her bag, and I swear I saw that predator look flash across her face again. "About what?" "About you knowing your place," Thex said, small flames flickering from his nostrils. "This academy is for warriors, not soft little creatures who should be back home playing with their young." "I see," Jessica said calmly, setting down her bag. "And what place would that be exactly?" Zara's crystalline form shifted, light refracting through her body in patterns that indicated aggressive intent. "Beneath us, obviously. Your species is barely evolved beyond tree-dwelling mammals." Now, here's where I expected Jessica to either break down crying or stammer some weak protest. What I didn't expect was for her to start laughing. Not the nervous giggle of someone trying to defuse a situation. Genuine, delighted laughter. "Oh, that's rich," she said, wiping at her eyes. "Tree-dwelling mammals. I haven't heard that one before." Brutus stepped forward, all 8 feet of him casting a shadow over the human. His species was known for their incredible strength. They could bench press a hover tank without breaking a sweat. "You think this is funny, little human?" "Honestly?" Jessica's smile was absolutely radiant. "Yeah, I do." That's when Corva made his first mistake. He reached out with one massive clawed hand, intending to grab Jessica by the shoulder. Probably just wanted to intimidate her, show her who was in charge. What happened next? Well, I'm still not entirely sure I believe it myself. Jessica moved. Not quickly, mind you. That's what was so unsettling about it. She didn't blur with superhuman speed or display any obvious enhanced abilities. She simply moved. Her body flowed like water, stepping inside Corva's reach while simultaneously grabbing his extended wrist. There was a soft click, the sound of joints being manipulated in ways they weren't designed for. Corva screamed. Actually screamed. This massive, 7-foot-tall killing machine with claws that could shred steel plates screamed like a youngling who'd stubbed their toe. His knees hit the floor so hard that the impact shook the entire classroom. Thex reacted first, lunging forward with flames already building in his throat. Jessica's response was to spin Corva around like he was a training dummy, using the Drakmarian's own body as a shield. Thex's fire breath washed over his friend instead of his intended target. The smell of burning scales filled the air. While Thex was recovering from the shock of accidentally torching his buddy, Jessica executed what I can only describe as the most elegant combat movement I've ever witnessed. She released Corva, who promptly collapsed in a whimpering heap, and flowed backward just as Brutus brought one massive fist crashing down where her head had been. Instead of her skull, Brutus's fist connected with the metal desk behind her. The desk, rated to withstand plasma cannon fire, crumpled like tissue. Paper Brutus howled, clutching what I suspected were several broken bones in his hand. But Jessica wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. As Brutus was distracted by his injury, Jessica grabbed his injured fist and pulled. Not hard, just a gentle, steady pressure that guided him exactly where she wanted him to go, which, as it turned out, was face first into the same desk he'd just destroyed. The impact sounded like a meteor hitting a planet's surface. Brutus joined Corva on the floor, though he was significantly less conscious. Zara, being a silicon-based life form, had thought herself immune to physical attacks. Her mistake was assuming that Jessica was limited to purely physical combat. Instead of trying to punch crystalline armor, the human grabbed the emergency fire suppression foam from the wall-mounted dispenser. "Did you know," Jessica said conversationally, as she aimed the nozzle at Zara, "that rapid temperature changes can cause crystalline structures to fracture? The foam was designed to instantly cool plasma fires when it hit Zara's superheated crystalline body. Well, let's just say that the sound of a silicon-based life form cracking under thermal stress is something you don't forget easily." Zara dropped like a shattered window. The entire confrontation had taken exactly 12 seconds. I know because I checked the classroom's chronometer afterward. 12 seconds to disable 4 of the Academy's most physically intimidating students. And Jessica? She calmly picked up her bag, stepped over the groaning pile of her attackers, and headed for the door. "Professor Morthen," she said as she passed my desk, her voice perfectly pleasant. "I'll see you next class period." Then she paused, looking back at the 4 students who were slowly beginning to regain consciousness. "Oh, and guys?" Her smile was absolutely radiant. "Next time you want to discuss evolutionary hierarchies, maybe do some research first. Humans didn't survive by being the strongest or the fastest." Her eyes went flat again. "We survived by being the most efficient killers our planet ever produced." With that cheerful little observation, she walked out of my classroom, leaving me staring at 4 cadets who would need extensive medical attention. I sat there for several long minutes, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Then I activated my communication array and contacted the Academy's medical bay. "Medical, this is Professor Morthen. I need 4 emergency transports to Classroom 7. We have multiple injuries requiring immediate attention." "What happened, Professor?" came the response. I looked at the wreckage that had once been my most troublesome students, then at the door through which a 5'6" human had calmly walked away. "I think," I said slowly, "I just learned something new about evolutionary biology." The medical teams arrived within minutes, efficiently loading the 4 injured cadets onto transport gurneys. As they wheeled Corva past my desk, he managed to grab my arm with his uninjured hand. "Professor," he whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "What? What is she?" I patted his clawed hand gently. "According to her species classification, Corva, she's a tree-dwelling mammal." His eyes went wide with terror before the medical sedatives kicked in. After the medical teams left, I found myself alone in my destroyed classroom, contemplating the implications of what I'd witnessed. For 3 centuries, I'd been teaching combat theory to the galaxy's apex predators. I'd seen quantum warriors phase through solid matter to strike their enemies. I'd watched hive-mind species coordinate attacks with perfect precision. I'd even observed entropy-class beings manipulate probability itself to ensure victory. But I'd never seen anything quite like Jessica Stone. The most unsettling part wasn't her efficiency in combat, though that was certainly impressive. No, what truly disturbed me was her complete emotional control throughout the entire encounter. She hadn't been angry when she disabled 4 opponents in 12 seconds. She'd been casual about it, like she was solving a particularly simple math problem. I activated my personal terminal and pulled up Jessica's academic file, Human Species Classification, Primitive Mammalian. Home planet, Earth. Designation, Class M Deathworld. Wait, Deathworld? I'd seen that classification before, but I'd never really paid attention to it. Most inhabited planets fell into the Class A through Class J range, with Class J representing environments that were challenging but manageable for most galactic species. Class M was something else entirely. I ran a search on Earth's environmental conditions and felt my primary heart stop beating for several seconds. Gravity, 1.2 standard galactic units. That meant Jessica had been operating under conditions that would have crushed most of my students. Atmospheric pressure, 1.4 standard units. She'd been breathing air that was nearly half again as dense as what most species considered normal. Weather patterns, extreme and unpredictable. The file mentioned something called hurricanes that could generate wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. There were tornadoes that could lift structures weighing several tons and hurl them through the air. And apparently, water sometimes fell from the sky in chunks of ice large enough to damage vehicles. Predator density. Critical levels. Earth apparently hosted something called apex predators in every major ecosystem. The files mentioned creatures called tigers that hunted alone and could bring down prey many times their size. There were great white sharks that could bite through steel. Something called a honey badger that was apparently so aggressive it would attack creatures 100 times its size just because it was in a bad mood. And humans lived among all of this. Not just lived, thrived. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process this information. Jessica Stone hadn't just been trained in combat techniques. She'd been forged in an environment where everything was actively trying to kill her from the moment she was born. No wonder she'd dispatched 4 academy cadets like they were minor inconveniences. My terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was from Dean Corthax, the Academy's administrator. "Professor Morthen, I've received medical reports regarding an incident in your classroom. Please report to my office immediately for debriefing." I sighed, gathered my materials, and headed for what I was sure would be a very interesting conversation. Dean Corthax was a Veltar, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a tree. His compound eyes tracked me as I entered his office, and his 4 arms gestured for me to take a seat. "Vex," he said without preamble, "tell me what happened." I gave him a complete account of the incident, from the initial verbal confrontation to Jessica's casual departure. By the time I finished, all 4 of his arms were perfectly still, which, for a Veltar, indicated either deep concentration or complete shock. 12 seconds, he said finally. 12 seconds, I confirmed. 4 cadets, including Brutus, who set the academy record for strength training. All 4 are currently in medical bay, receiving treatment for various injuries. None life-threatening, but all requiring significant healing time. Dean Corthax was quiet for several minutes, his compound eyes reflecting light as he processed this information. "Professor," he said eventually, "in your professional opinion, was Cadet Stone defending herself?" I considered the question carefully. Technically, yes. She was outnumbered 4-1, and her attackers had initiated physical contact. However, I don't think she was ever in any real danger. The entire encounter felt more like she was conducting a practical demonstration. A demonstration of what? Of why humans are classified as a death world species. The Dean's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. I see. And what is your recommendation regarding disciplinary action? Against whom? I asked. The 4 students who ganged up on a classmate and got thoroughly humiliated for their trouble. Or the human who defended herself using what appeared to be natural reflexes. Point taken. He activated his communication array. Medical Bay, this is Dean Corthax. What's the status on our injured cadets? The response came immediately. Dean, this is Chief Medical Officer Xylith. All 4 patients are stable. Cadet Corva has a dislocated shoulder and several strained tendons. Cadet Thex has minor burns and a concussion. Cadet Brutus has 3 broken bones in his right hand and facial contusions. Cadet Zara has multiple stress fractures throughout her crystalline matrix. Expected recovery time? 2 to 3 weeks. For full healing, assuming no complications. Dean Corthax closed the communication link and turned back to me. Vex, I want you to compile a complete report on this incident. Include everything. Student statements, your observations, medical findings, everything. Of course. But may I ask why? His compound eyes seemed to focus on something far away. Because, my friend, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. 3 days after the incident, I was reviewing combat footage in my office when Jessica knocked on my door. She stood there with that same polite smile, looking for all the world like she hadn't recently hospitalized 4 of her classmates. "Professor Morthen, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Jessica. Please, come in." She settled into the chair across from my desk, her posture relaxed but alert. I'd started noticing these little details about her. The way she always positioned herself with a clear view of all exits. How her eyes constantly tracked movement. Even the fact that she never fully turned her back to anyone. "I wanted to apologize," she said simply. That caught me off guard. Apologize? For what? For disrupting your class. I know the cleanup and medical calls probably caused you a lot of paperwork. I stared at her. Here was a being who'd been attacked by 4 opponents and had defended herself with remarkable skill. And she was worried about paperwork. "Jessica," I said carefully, "you do realize that you weren't the aggressor in that situation, right?" She tilted her head slightly. A gesture I was learning meant she was considering her words. "No, but I could have handled it differently. Less dramatically." "How so?" Her smile turned slightly mischievous. "I could have just broken Corva's wrist instead of dislocating his shoulder. Would have been quieter." The casual way she discussed crippling a classmate was both fascinating and terrifying. This wasn't bloodthirst or cruelty. It was simple, tactical analysis. "Jessica, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Back on Earth, what did you do? Before the academy, I mean." Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. I was a student. High school, then university. What kind of student carries themselves like a professional warrior? She was quiet for a long moment, those brown eyes studying my face. Finally, she seemed to come to some internal decision. Professor, have you ever heard of something called mixed martial arts? I shook my head. It's a combat sport on Earth. Combines techniques from dozens of different fighting disciplines. Boxing, wrestling, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu. The goal is to find the most effective techniques from each style and blend them together. And you participated in this sport? Since I was 12 years old. She leaned forward slightly. Professor, on Earth, we don't have natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armored hide, no ability to breathe fire. So we had to get creative. We developed fighting, systems that could work against opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better armed than us. The implications hit me like a meteor impact. You mean those techniques you used on Corva and the others are specifically designed to neutralize larger, more physically powerful opponents? Yes. I felt my secondary breathing apparatus start wheezing again. How many humans know these techniques? Most of them, to some degree. It's pretty common for human parents to enroll their children in some form of combat training. You know, for self-defense. Self-defense. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like every species taught their young how to disable apex predators with their bare hands. Jessica, I said slowly, I think I'm beginning to understand why your planet is classified as a death world. Her laugh was genuinely delighted. Oh, Professor, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until you meet Marcus. Marcus? Another human cadet. He's supposed to arrive next week. Her eyes sparkled with what I was learning to recognize as barely contained mischief. He's from a place called Australia. Before I could ask what was so special about Australia, my communication array chimed. Dean Corthax's voice filled the office. Professor Morthen, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. Bring Cadet Stone with you. Jessica and I exchanged glances. Well, she said cheerfully, this should be interesting. Conference Room Alpha was the Academy's most secure briefing chamber, typically reserved for discussing classified military operations. When we arrived, I was surprised to find it packed with Academy staff. Dean Corthax stood at the head of the table, flanked by Chief Medical Officer Xylith and Combat Instructor Vorthak. But it was the figure at the far end of the table that made my blood run cold. General Krakthos of the Hegemony Defense Force. 4 meters of scarred exoskeleton and barely contained violence. He was a legend. A warrior who'd fought in 17 major conflicts and had never once retreated from battle. And he was staring directly at Jessica, with something that looked suspiciously like hunger. Cadet Stone, Dean Corthax began, thank you for joining us. Please, take a seat. Jessica settled into an empty chair with her usual grace, apparently unbothered by the fact that she was surrounded by some of the most powerful military figures in the galaxy. I took the seat next to her, trying not to look as nervous as I felt. Cadet, General Krakthos spoke, his voice like grinding stone. I've reviewed the medical reports from your recent altercation. Impressive work. Thank you, sir, Jessica replied politely. Tell me, how many of your species possess similar combat capabilities? Jessica considered the question seriously. Most humans receive some form of combat training, General, though the level varies significantly based on individual interest and cultural background. I see. And this training, it's mandatory? Not exactly mandatory, sir, but given our environmental conditions, it's Advisable. General Krakthos leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the room's lighting. Environmental conditions? Well, sir, Earth hosts a significant number of large predators. Plus, we have these things called criminals, who sometimes attack law-abiding citizens. And then there are natural disasters, wild animals, domestic disputes. She shrugged. It's generally considered wise to know how to defend yourself. The room was completely silent. I could practically hear everyone's minds trying to process this information. Cadet Stone, Chief Medical Officer Xylith interjected, when you engaged your 4 attackers, were you operating at full capacity? Jessica's expression became carefully neutral. I'm sorry. Could you clarify the question? Were you fighting as hard as you could, using your maximum capabilities? The human was quiet for several seconds, and I noticed that predator look flash across her face again. No, ma'am, she said finally. I was being very careful not to cause permanent damage. The silence stretched even longer this time. Combat instructor Vorthak, a massive Goranian who'd trained some of the galaxy's most elite warriors, cleared his throat. Cadet, in your opinion, how would you fare against a fully trained military opponent? Jessica tilted her head in that considering gesture. That would depend on several factors, sir. Their species, their training background, environmental conditions, available equipment. Assume optimal conditions for your opponent. Their choice of terrain, weapons, preparation time. Then I'd probably lose, she said matter-of-factly. I'm still a student, after all. I haven't completed my military training yet. General Krakthos made a sound that might have been laughter. Cadet, you hospitalized 4 academy students in 12 seconds using nothing but your natural reflexes. What exactly do you think military training would add to your capabilities? Jessica's smile was absolutely radiant. Well, sir, military training would teach me things like weapons proficiency, tactical planning, team coordination, equipment maintenance. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. But mostly, it would teach me discipline. Knowing when not to fight is just as important as knowing how to fight. That's when it hit me. The most unsettling thing about Jessica Stone wasn't her combat abilities. It was her restraint. She could have killed Corva and his friends, easily. Instead, she'd chosen to disable them with minimal lasting damage. She'd been holding back. Dean Korthax activated a holographic display showing Academy combat statistics. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this meeting to discuss a rather unique situation. In the past 3 days, Academy enrollment applications from human candidates have increased by 4,000%. 4,000%. I felt my tertiary heart skip several beats. It appears, the Dean continued, that word of Cadet Stone's performance has spread throughout human space. We're receiving applications from something called Navy SEALs, Special Air Service, Spetsnaz, and dozens of other human military organizations I've never heard of. Jessica's expression had gone carefully blank. Sir, those are elite Special Forces units. Elite how? They're the humans we send when we need something very dangerous done very quietly. General Krakthos leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. Cadet, how many humans would you estimate possess elite-level combat training? Active military personnel? Maybe a few million, depending on how you define elite. A few million, the general repeated slowly. Yes, sir. Though that doesn't include veterans, law enforcement, civilian martial artists, hunters, or people with informal training. Informal training? You know, bar fights, street fighting, self-defense classes, sports combat, military families teaching their children. She shrugged. It adds up. The room erupted in whispered conversations as Academy staff tried to process the implications of what they were hearing. Dean Corthax called for order. Cadet Stone, we need to discuss your future here at the Academy. Given recent events, we're concerned about other students targeting me? Jessica interrupted gently. Or about me being too dangerous for a normal classroom environment? Both, actually. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. I understand your concerns, sir. But I'd like to stay, if possible. I'm learning a lot here. What exactly are you learning? Combat Instructor Vorthak asked. Your combat skills already exceed most of our advanced students. I'm learning about other species, sir. Their strengths, weaknesses, cultural backgrounds, tactical preferences. Her smile turned slightly predatory. It's fascinating, really. Take Corva, for example. Drakmarians are incredibly strong and fast, but they rely too heavily on intimidation. They expect their opponents to be afraid. When fear doesn't work, they don't have effective backup strategies. She turned to address the room in general. Thex's species can breathe fire, which is certainly impressive. But fire requires oxygen, and they have to pause between attacks to build up enough gas in their breathing chambers. That creates predictable timing gaps. General Kraktos was hanging on every word. Continue. Zara's crystalline structure makes her nearly invulnerable to physical attacks, but silicon-based life forms are vulnerable to rapid temperature changes. And Brutus. Well, Goranians are massively strong, but they're used to overwhelming their opponents with brute force. They don't expect their attacks to be redirected back at them. The room was dead silent again. You analyzed all of this, Chief Medical Officer Xylith said, slowly, in the middle of a fight. Before the fight, actually. I've been observing my classmates for months. Dean Corthax activated his communication array. Security, this is the Dean. I want a complete review of all Academy surveillance footage involving Cadet Stone. Compile a behavioral analysis and have it on my desk within the hour. He closed the connection and turned back to Jessica. Cadet, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a completely honest answer. Do you pose a threat to other students at this academy? Jessica considered this seriously. Not unless they attack me first, sir. I have no interest in hurting anyone. I'm here to learn. And if someone does attack you? Her smile was absolutely charming. Then they'll learn something too, sir. General Krakthos stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across the entire room. Dean Corthax, I'm recommending that Cadet Stone be fast-tracked into our advanced tactical programs. I want to see what humans are truly capable of when properly trained. General, Jessica said politely, with respect, you might want to wait and see how Marcus does first. The other human cadet you mentioned? Why? Because Marcus is from Australia, sir, and Australians are… She paused, searching for the right words. They're a bit different, even by human standards. Different? How? Well, sir, Australia is the part of Earth where we sent all the humans who were too dangerous for regular society. They've been living there for a few hundred years now, adapting to an environment that's actively trying to kill them in creative new ways every day. The room went completely silent. Everything in Australia wants to kill you, Jessica continued cheerfully. The spiders, the snakes, the jellyfish, the plants, the weather, even some of the mammals. Australians developed a very practical approach to survival. Which is, if it's dangerous, kill it first. If it's bigger than you, find a bigger stick. If that doesn't work, get creative. General Kraktos sat back down heavily. And this Marcus individual survived in such an environment? Not just survived, sir. He thrived. Last I heard, he was working as a wildlife photographer, which means he spent his time voluntarily getting close to the most dangerous creatures on our planet, just to take pictures of them. I realized I was gripping my chair so tightly that my claws were leaving marks in the metal. Dean Corthax's voice was barely a whisper. How many humans live in this Australia place? About 25 million, sir. 25 million humans who are considered dangerous, even by Earth standards. Yes, sir. Though, to be fair, most of them are perfectly lovely people. They just happen to be really, really hard to kill. The meeting ended shortly after that, with Academy staff looking shell-shocked and General Krakthos muttering something about requesting reinforcements. Jessica and I walked back, toward the academic sector in comfortable silence. Jessica, I said finally, can I ask you something personal? Sure, Professor. Are you scared? Being here alone, surrounded by species that see humans as inferior? She was quiet for several steps. Professor, I grew up on a planet where the weather can kill you. The animals want to eat you, and even some of the plants are poisonous. I've been in fights since I was old enough to walk. I've faced down opponents twice my size, with nothing but my bare hands. She stopped walking and turned to face me. But you know what really scares me? What? The idea that other species might learn to fight like humans do. Because once they figure out that size and strength don't matter as much as technique and tactics. Her smile was absolutely terrifying. Well, let's just say the galaxy might become a much more interesting place. 1 week later, Marcus Williams arrived at the Academy. He was taller than Jessica, with sun-bleached hair and a casual demeanor that somehow made him seem even more dangerous than his fellow human. When Dean Corthax asked him about his background, Marcus just grinned and said, "No worries, mate. I'm just here to learn." That afternoon, a group of senior cadets decided to test the new human's capabilities. They cornered him in the recreation area, confident that they could intimidate him into submission. They found him 3 hours later, unconscious and tied to the ceiling using their own shoelaces. Marcus was sitting calmly nearby, reading a tactical manual. "G'day, Professor," he said cheerfully when I arrived on the scene. "These fellas were feeling a bit poorly, so I thought I'd help them have a lie down." When Academy security asked him how he'd managed to hang 4 opponents from the ceiling without seriously injuring them, Marcus just shrugged. "Back home, we call it creative problem-solving. You work with what you've got, right?" That night, I updated my personal journal with a simple entry. Note to self: recommend immediate reclassification of human species from primitive mammalian to approach with extreme caution. 3 months later, the Academy had received over 50,000 applications from human candidates. Dean Corthax had to establish an entirely separate campus just to handle the influx. And me? Well, I requested a transfer to the new Human Studies department. Because if there's one thing I have learned in my centuries of teaching, it's that when you encounter something that completely overturns everything you thought you knew about combat, intelligence, and survival, you'd better learn everything you can about it before someone else figures out how to use it against you. The galaxy, as Jessica had predicted, was about to become a much more interesting place. After all, humans weren't just survivors. They were teachers. And they were very, very good at sharing what they'd learned. The age of human dominance in Galactic. Military affairs had begun with 2 students, a 12-second fight, and a lesson that no one would ever forget. Never underestimate a species just because they look harmless. Because on a death world like Earth, looking harmless is often the most dangerous trait of all.